Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're kicking off something really interesting just for you, our listener.
Right.
And a mission for this first dive anyway is to get a real handle on where this ancient practice actually started back in India. It's setting the scene for, well, a much bigger series we have planned.
Absolutely. It's a topic with just incredible depth, and understanding where it all began is, I think, crucial for grasping what yoga is today and maybe where it's heading.
Definitely. And, the source material hints at some quite surprising things about yoga's history right off the bat, things that might give you a bit of an aha moment.
Oh, for sure. What's immediately captivating is just how far back the history seems to stretch, further than many people probably realize.
Okay, so let's start right at the source, maybe. The word itself.
Yeah.
Yoga. The material points out it comes from Sanskrit, the root yuj.
Yes, you. And it means to unite, or to join, or to yoke, even.
Right, to unite. But what exactly is being united here? What does that mean in practice?
That's really the core question, isn't it? And the text explains it on a couple of levels, which are kind of intertwined.
Okay.
Firstly, there's the union of the individual self, the jiva, you could say, with the universal consciousness or Brahman.
So like the personal connecting with the bigger picture, the cosmic.
Exactly.
Right.
Realizing that fundamental connection between our own little awareness and, well, everything else.
Okay, that makes sense. And there was another dimension mentioned too.
Yes, it's also about integration within ourselves, bringing together the body, the mind, and the spirit, making them work as a harmonious whole.
Ah, okay, so not just looking outwards, but inwards too, achieving balance.
Precisely. It's about that internal coherence.
So this idea of union, it naturally points towards a broader goal, right?
Exactly.
Something about controlling the mind and body.
Exactly. The source really stresses this. Across different traditions, Hindu, Jain, Buddhist, these yoga practices are tools for gaining mastery over the physical self and, importantly, the mental chatter.
And the ultimate aim of that control.
Well, it's generally geared towards achieving salvation or liberation, release from suffering, depending on the specific philosophy of that tradition. The end goal might look slightly different, but the path involves that self-mastery.
Which brings us to something really intriguing in the material, this idea that yoga might be even older than we think. Pre-Vedic, maybe?
Yeah.
With actual archaeological clues.
Yes. This is where it gets quite fascinating. Research suggests yoga's roots could go back maybe over 5,000 years, which would place it before the Vedic period, which we usually think of as the start of documented Indian scripture.
Wow, 5,000 years. So what's the evidence from back then?
It comes from the Indus Valley Civilization. We're talking around 3000 BCE.
Yeah.
And the key finds are these seals, like little carved stones, and some fossil remains too, that show figures and postures that look remarkably like yoga poses.
You mean like meditation poses?
Exactly. Seated meditation poses mainly. You look at them and they're instantly recognizable, even compared to practices documented much, much later. It's pretty compelling visual evidence for very early contemplative practices.
That really is amazing. Physical proof from so long ago. The source also mentioned something about early Tantra yoga possibly being linked to this civilization. That
Yeah.
sounds unexpected.
It is a fascinating hypothesis, yeah. Archaeologists found phallic symbols like lingams and also idols of mother goddesses in the Indus Valley sites.
Okay.
And some scholars suggest this might point towards early forms of Tantra yoga. Early Tantra often involved, weaving together spiritual practices with rituals, energy work, sometimes using these kinds of symbolic representations.
So a blend of the spiritual and the ritualistic, maybe? Even way back then.
It's a possibility, suggesting a really complex spiritual landscape right from these early stages.
That's incredible. Okay, let's move forward a bit in time. The source brings us to the Vedic era, and specifically the Rig Veda. What do we see there regarding yoga?
Right, the Rig Veda, dated around 1500 BCE. This is where we find the earliest textual references to practices that, well, seem like precursors to yoga.
So not yoga as a full system yet, but hints of it?
Exactly. It doesn't lay out a whole yoga philosophy, but you find mentions of meditation, of breath control, scattered within the hymns or ritual descriptions.
And who was practicing this? And why? What was the context?
Primarily, it seems these practices were used by the Hindu priests, the Brahmins, and also hermits as part of their rituals and prayers.
So integrated into religious practice.
Yes. The main focus during this Vedic period, say 1500 to 500 BCE, was really about connecting with the divine, using these techniques to deepen that spiritual connection, that communion.
Okay, so starting within a ritual context, how did things develop from there? The Upanishads come next in the source material.
Ah, the Upanishads. They represent a really significant development, appearing roughly between 800 and 200 BCE. They took those initial Vedic ideas and expanded on them hugely, diving much deeper into the philosophical side.
Deeper how? What kind of concepts emerge then?
Well, this is where we see clear discussion of concepts central to later yoga. Things like dhyana meditation, proper focus meditation, and also control of prana.
Prana, the life force or vital energy.
Precisely. The conscious control and manipulation of these subtle energies. And crucially, the Upanishads delve into Atman, the individual soul or self, and its relationship to Brahman, that ultimate reality we talked about earlier.
So understanding the self and its connection to everything.
Yes, it's like they were laying down the philosophical bedrock for yoga as a structured path to self-realization, moving it beyond just ritual.
Got it. Building the foundations for a more systematic spiritual discipline.
That's a good way to put it.
Uh.
Taking those early threads and weaving them into something much more cohesive.
Which leads us, according to the source, to a really key turning point, the rise of the Sramana movement. What happened there?
Right. Around the 5th and 6th centuries BCE, there was this explosion of spiritual and intellectual activity in India. This saw the rise of various ascetic groups, the Sramanas or renunciates.
Like Jains and Buddhists.
Exactly. Jainism and early Buddhism were major players in this Srama landscape. These movements often operated outside or even challenged the traditional Vedic framework. They emphasized personal experience and renunciation.
And how did yoga fit into that?
Well, for these groups focused on liberation and breaking free from worldly ties, yoga practices were incredibly valuable. They adopted and adapted yogic techniques, meditation, breath control as practical methods to achieve their goals.
So yoga became a tool for renunciation.
A very central tool, yes. And this period saw these practices becoming much more structured, much more systematized than what we saw in the earlier text.
More structured how? What was the emphasis?
The focus really sharpened on things like sustained meditation techniques, disciplined breath work, and critically ethical living, how you conduct yourself in the world. These became core components.
Right. Not just internal practice, but external conduct too.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is that yoga starts getting picked up and integrated across these different philosophical schools. It showed its adaptability.
So it wasn't just confined to one lineage anymore.
No, it started to spread, its appeal broadened. This period was probably vital in making yoga feel like a more, universally applicable path, not tied exclusively to Vedic ritual.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wider adoption leads to more refinement. And that refinement seems to culminate in what many see as the classical text, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
Yes, the Yoga Sutras. Composed somewhere between 200 BCE and 200 CE, this text is just foundational. It's seen as highly authoritative, providing this incredibly systematic framework for yoga philosophy and practice.
And Patanjali gives that famous definition of yoga.
He does. Yoga Chittafutti Nirodha.
Which means?
Yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind.
Stopping the mental chatter.
Essentially, yes. Achieving that state of mental stillness, going beyond the constant stream of thoughts and distractions to find a deeper awareness.
Now, the source mentions it's rooted in Sankhya philosophy, but Patanjali adds a twist. Something theistic.
Right. Samkhya is one of the ancient Indian philosophical schools, a dualistic one distinguishing consciousness, Purusha, from matter, Prakriti. Patanjali draws heavily on Samkhya, but he introduces Isvara, which can be understood as a kind of supreme being, a personal god, or a divine principle. So devotion to Isvara, or Isvara Pranidhana, becomes one potential path or aid within his system. It adds that theistic element.
Interesting. And the most famous part probably is the 8 limbs, Ashtanga Yoga. Can you walk us through those briefly?
Sure. It's a progressive path. First, the yamas. These are ethical restraints guiding how we interact with others. Nonviolence, ahimsa, truthfulness, satya, things like that.
Okay, social ethics first.
Then the niyamas. These are personal observances, purity, shaucha, contentment, santosha, self-discipline, more about inner cultivation.
Right.
Third, asana, the physical postures. Importantly, in the sutras, the main aim of asana is to create a steady, comfortable seat for meditation. Health and stability are key, but it serves the meditative goal.
Preparation for sitting still.
That's exactly. Fourth, pranayama, breath control, regulating that vital life force, prana, to calm the nervous system and mind.
Okay.
Fifth, pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, turning the attention inwards, away from external distractions.
Starting to get more internal now.
Definitely. Sixth is dharana concentration, fixing the mind on a single point or object.
Focus.
Seventh, dhyana, meditation, sustained, unbroken flow of concentration, deeper than dharana.
Right.
And finally, eighth, samadhi, absorption or union, transcending the self, merging with the object of meditation, experiencing that ultimate state of yoga.
Wow. It's such a complete system, isn't it? So clearly laid out.
It really is. And as the source points out, this very systematization was crucial. It made yoga much more accessible, more understandable, more applicable for people wanting to follow the path. Patanjali gave it a clear structure.
He provided the roadmap, essentially.
You could say that, yes. A very influential roadmap.
Now, shifting gears slightly, the source brings up something maybe less expected, the mythological origins, focusing on Lord Shiva. That's not always the first thing people associate with yoga's start.
No, but it's a really important strand within the tradition itself. In yogic lore, Shiva is revered as the Adiyogi.
The first yogi?
The very first yogi, yes. And also the Adiguru, the first teacher, the ultimate source of yogic wisdom.
And there's a story about how he shared this knowledge.
There is. The legend tells of Shiva imparting the profound knowledge of yoga to the Saptarishis, the 7 great sages.
Where did this happen?
On the banks of Lake Kandisaravar, high up in the Himalayas, a very sacred, potent setting.
And these sages, the Saptarishis, they then spread the teachings.
That's the tradition. They are said to have traveled to different parts of the world carrying this yogic knowledge with them, which, interestingly, hints at a potential ancient global spread or influence, at least within the mythology.
So this story really anchors yoga deep within Indian spirituality, but also kind of positions it as a potentially universal wisdom from the get-go.
Precisely. It gives it that deep cultural root, but also this timeless, universal quality. And it highlights the importance of the guru, the teacher, in transmitting this knowledge, which is still a key aspect of many yoga traditions.
Okay, so bringing back from mythology to the historical timeline, the Course talks about how yoga evolved. We've seen its early focus was very spiritual, meditative. How did the physical side, the asanas we know today, become more prominent?
Well, as we discussed initially with the Vedas and Upanishads, the emphasis was strongly on meditation, breath, philosophy. The physical postures, the asanas, and the more complex pranayama techniques came into focus later.
And their purpose was?
Primarily to prepare the body for long periods of meditation, to make it strong, flexible, stable, so it wouldn't be a distraction. The body was seen as a vehicle needing to be tuned, essentially.
So the physical practice served the spiritual goal.
In the earlier phases, yes, it was supportive. The source mentions the Hatha Yoga Pradipika as a key text marking a shift.
When was that?
Around the 15th century CE. This text gives much more detailed attention to asanas and pranayama, alongside things like purification techniques, shat karmas, and energy seals, mudras. It represents a point where Hatha Yoga, focusing more on the physical and energetic body, really starts to crystallize as a distinct system.
So a move towards a more, maybe, holistic approach, incorporating the body more actively.
You could say that, a greater emphasis on working through the body as part of the path.
Now, we've mostly talked about Hinduism, but the source also mentions yoga influencing Jainism and Buddhism.
Right. It's important to remember yoga didn't exist in a vacuum. Jainism developed its own yoga traditions, often emphasizing rigorous ethics and specific meditation forms.
And Buddhism?
While they might use different terms, Buddhist practices, especially concerning meditation, mindfulness, concentration, ethical conduct, there are clear parallels and likely cross-influences with yogic traditions. They were all part of this incredibly rich spiritual landscape in ancient India.
Makes sense. Ideas were flowing back and forth.
Undoubtedly, enriching all the traditions involved.
Okay, finally, the source touches on the modern era yoga spreading globally. This is how most people encounter it now, isn't it?
Absolutely. The 20th century saw a huge expansion of yoga beyond India. It's a fascinating story of cultural exchange.
And often the focus now is on physical fitness, stress relief.
That's very common, yes. Modern yoga in the West particularly often emphasizes the physical benefits, the stress reduction, which are definitely valuable. But as the source notes, for many people worldwide, those deeper spiritual and philosophical roots remain incredibly important.
And we see so many different styles today. Hatha, Ashtanga, the Vinyasa style. Kundalini.
Exactly. These different styles reflect how yoga has been interpreted and adapted for modern life for different needs, which is natural, perhaps.
But the source also mentions some debate around this.
Yeah.
Commercialization, maybe losing the original intent.
Yes, there's an ongoing conversation about that. Has the focus on fitness, on yoga pants, and expensive studios sometimes diluted the deeper spiritual aims? It's a valid question to ask.
A tension between the ancient roots and modern forms.
For sure. But the source does end on a positive note, suggesting that despite all these changes, the core principles that search for unity, for inner peace, for self-understanding, still resonate deeply with people everywhere.
Yeah, that fundamental appeal seems to endure.
It really does. That core drive seems to cut across cultures and time.
So just to wrap up the key takeaways from this first deep dive, yoga's history is incredibly long and complex. We're talking thousands of years, from possible Indus Valley whispers through Vedic hints, Upanishadic philosophy, Sramana systematization, Patanjali's classical formulation, mythological layers with Shiva, and then this continuous evolution right up to today's global phenomenon.
Absolutely. It's not one single thing that just appeared. It's a constantly evolving tradition with incredibly deep roots. Understanding that history really gives you a richer appreciation for the practice, whatever form it takes today.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it, about how those ancient origins focus so much on spiritual liberation connect with how we practice yoga now. If that was the original goal, what does that mean for us doing yoga for stress relief or fitness or even just relaxation? How does knowing the history shape our own approach?
That's the provocative thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does this ancient lineage inform our modern engagement, and what does it suggest about yoga's future as it keeps changing and adapting? It's something to really mull over.
Definitely. And as you said, this is just scratching the surface. In future deep dives, we can get into perhaps specific schools of thought or trace how certain practices like asana or pranayama developed in more detail.
So much more to explore. Looking forward to it.